Agri-food systems are very complex. When we talk about these systems, we're not just talking about agriculture, which employs over a quarter of the global population. We're also talking about health, environment, economics and trade, as well as conflict and global security. I'm Catherine Park, the host of The Work We Do, a new podcast from the Food and Agriculture Organization of the UN. At FAO, we bring science and policy together to help countries build agri-food systems that are resilient, inclusive, and sustainable. This podcast shares their work. In our very first episode, I'm joined by Máximo Torero, FAO's chief economist. Our conversation begins with how FAO is building resilience to shocks. We explore why investing in agri-food systems is essential for stability and national security. You'll also hear about the critical role of the private sector and international financial institutions like the World Bank at a time of declining official development assistance, or ODA. Máximo also reflects on how coming from Peru has shaped his journey from his work at the International Food Policy Research Institute, IFPRI, and the World Bank to the role he plays today at FAO. Welcome to The Work We Do. Máximo, we're recording in the Situation Room where FAO's work on shock-driven food crisis response come together. FAO's work in this area it stands out, in my opinion, because of its emphasis on food security. And this initiative was launched under your leadership just last summer. So if you could just tell us a bit about this work, why it's important at this moment, and we'll take it from there.
Oh, very nice being with you today, Catherine. Look, the idea of the Situation Room was to start to put a little bit more lights on what was happening in terms of risks in the world. Why? Because the agri-food system, the one we work at FAO, is going to be affected by intensity and frequency of climate events. But it's not only climate, climate will also influence how pests and diseases will evolve. And of course, we have conflicts, which have an endogenous relationship also with shocks, with climate shocks, with poverty and hunger, but also vice versa. So that's the world that we will be living in the next 10 to 20 years or 30 years. We don't know. But clearly, we need to be prepared for that. And why I say lights? Because if we want to react to something, we need to know where that is happening and how it is happening. Now, the Situation Room started as part of a G7 initiative where we wanted to create a system that will allow us to ensure for action in emergencies. Why? Because ODA to emergencies was shrinking and the needs were increasing. And we need to find a different way to attract the private sector to be able to bring insurance into the agri-food system, especially for emergencies. And when I refer to emergencies, I refer to acute food insecurity. So we started to think how we can do that. And we decided that the first thing was to set up an information system that is a standard for all the UN agencies and for all the different players in emergencies that will allow them to know when a risk is going to get to a level which could create an impact over food security, especially over acute food insecurity. So if, for example, a drought happens to a country, at what level we will be able to know that the drought will really impact food security? If there is floods, if there is cyclones, so that we just saw one cyclone affecting Jamaica, for example, when to do. So the Situation Room brings together all the different work of different FAO units that specialize in each of the topics, in floods, in water, in extreme weather, in extreme climate, droughts, in cyclones, in locusts, and in other topics related to pests and diseases. But also we bring conflict. We try to predict conflict. And with that, what it does is every day it estimates real time where the thresholds could cross an extreme value. And if the threshold crosses an extreme value, that means that the probability of that event to happen is super high. And if that probability is at that level, then, for example, insurance should trigger if we have the policies in place. So this is bringing us more lights because I will know few hours or few days in advance if El Nino is happening, if there is a flood happening in Pakistan, or a flood happening in the US, or a drought happening in Africa, in the Sahel. And therefore we can act, and we can act with anticipation. We can do anticipatory action, meaning I can deploy things, position assets, position elements that will help these people to be able to be better prepared even before the shock happens. So that's, in summary, what we want to do with this situation room.
Mm-hmm. So, what are the tools that are part of this initiative that makes anticipatory action possible?
Exactly. Today, anticipatory action responds with ODA, no, essentially with emergency funds. Essentially, if we are able to act a little bit earlier or immediately, what we call rapid response, funds will be deployed, for example, by OCHA, by the World Food Program, and they will put assets and they will try to increase resilience of the households that are going to be affected. Now, as I said before, that's not enough. It's far from what is needed. And what we know on the evidence we have is that every dollar invested in anticipatory action pays you $7 as a return.
Okay.
So 1 to 7. We also know that insurance could scale up my coverage 10 times more. So what we are trying to do here is we're trying to do a kind of a revolution in the industry of reinsurance. Why I call it a revolution? Because today, like if you have your car insurance, the accident has to happen for your insurance to pay.
Mhm.
If you have an agricultural insurance, the drought has to happen for the insurance to pay. What we are working with the reinsurance companies here is how I can make the reinsurance to trigger the payment with probabilities. So, for example, if I know that there is a 95 probability that El Nino will happen, I won't wait for the Nino to happen. I will trigger in advance so that the payout goes out. I can prepare and clean the rivers. I can give technical assistance to farmers so that they will be prepared for El Nino. So when El Nino hits, they will be more resilient to the shock, and therefore they will lose less. If I respond a little bit late, it will be zero. It will be negative even. So we need to change completely the way we work, not only to use the money, the public money, the ODA money, but also to bring private money through the reinsurance system that will allow us to do this anticipatory action.
Mm-hmm. You've mentioned other UN agencies. Does this complement what is already out there? Because there are emergency funds and
No, today,
structures in
yes,
place.
correct. Today there is anticipatory action frameworks in place.
Okay.
OCHA, WFP, even emergencies of FAO, the OER of FAO, we work on anticipatory action. What is the problem and what we're trying to improve? So this is not to substitute, this is to complement. The first problem is that the coverage of risks is very restricted. Here we're talking of around 6 climatic risks, 6 non-climatic risks, non-insurable risks. So we want to expand the coverage because that make it more attractive for reinsurance companies. The second thing is that we don't have standardized triggers. So the situation room you have here today is trying to standardize the trigger so that all the agencies will react to exactly the same trigger, because that will make it more feasible for insurance companies too. The third thing is that we are making it more fast of response, because instead of working directly with the government, we work with anticipatory action frameworks already prepared by the agencies that already have in place an arrangement with the government. So we deploy the money out to the agencies, to WFP, to OCHA, to FAO, and they can immediately act in the country because they already have everything arranged in the countries. So that increases velocity, which is central. Because no matter how good your trigger is, if your trigger says it's going to happen, you deploy the money and then you have to negotiate contracts with governments and so on. It will take a lot of time, and then you lose anticipatory time to do it.
Right. That's correct.
And then we're going to pop up the level of resources in anticipatory action today. So the idea is to complement, but to bring innovations that will make it even better. And of course, bringing reinsurance companies with probabilistic triggers is a huge innovation. And that will increase our coverage 10 times. So if I invest $100 million, I will be able to cover
10 times that
10 times
amount.
that. That's where we are aiming. Plus, I know I will have returns of 1 to 7. So it's a win-win situation, and it's very technically sound based on expertise of people working in these topics for years.
Okay. And the situation room is central to monitoring risk.
Exactly. It's central because you can access the situation room from your phone or from your computer at home or in the country. But the situation room is central because it's standardizing the triggers
Mm-hmm.
so that all the industry knows when this is going to trigger,
Mm-hmm.
and they can compete for the minimum premiums, for example. And at the same time, it's working with the country so that they are aware of that could be happening in their
Mm-hmm.
economies.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You have dedicated your career to addressing hunger and poverty. Why are they so difficult to address?
Look, we live in a world where we have today 673 million people in hunger, a world where around 2.6 billion people don't have access to healthy diets, a world where we are wasting and losing 30% of our food, a world that the tomorrow looks very complex because of the increase of an intensity of frequency of climate shocks, a world where water will be scarce,
Mm-hmm.
the soils are not necessarily the quality we want, and a lot of poverty, of course, and especially inequality. Inequality exacerbated after COVID-19. So in that situation, things are complex, no? Because you want to reduce hunger, you want to reduce poverty, but you have an environment where conflicts, intensity, and frequency of climate events is increasing, an environment where financial constraints for the poorest countries is increasing. Most of the countries in food crisis are in debt distress,
Mm-hmm.
and people don't understand. But debt distress means that nobody will lend you money.
Right.
Okay, and if you want to buy your food, your import bill, if you're a food import dependent country, you need money. And if prices go up, the little money that you have values less. And if the exchange rate devaluates, it even values less. So it's not only a price effect, it's also the exchange rate effect because I need to buy dollars with my local currency, which is weak, to import the food I need.
That's
So
right.
that's the world we are. So the issues are complex. People think that agriculture is not so complex, but it's super complex. It's a world of risk and uncertainties because I could be deciding to plant soybeans or to plant maize or to plant corn, and then suddenly I have a flood. I lost everything. Imagine you're a farmer that invests all your little money to buy your fertilizers and your seeds. That's what your technical assistants and the extensionists told you. And then suddenly you have a flood that
You
you
lose
never expected.
everything.
Everything is lost. Your savings of your life are lost. And what you do? You go immediately into hunger. You go immediately into poverty. No? Remember COVID-19, no? If COVID-19 closed the markets, the informal sector, for example, couldn't do nothing. They couldn't go out to sell. And that is what created the problem and what make it more difficult to operate. And that's why all these people move into poverty. And then they don't have capacity to recover. No?
Mm-hmm.
And those are the people that basically are behind the silent numbers of poverty and hunger. It's important to understand, for example, in COVID-19, no? What happened in COVID-19, what happened is many countries put policies in place to close their economies. So there were no local markets. So if you were an informal person, you normally go and sell outside in the streets and so on. If there is no people in the streets, there is
Then
nothing
you
to sell.
cannot sell.
So all your working capital will disappear. And that was based on your savings because you don't have access to banks, to financial system. So an informal sector person normally will be not poor because they were doing something. They were
Mm-hmm.
bringing money to their households, but all the livelihoods are destroyed. Their savings are gone. So they go immediately to poverty. Okay. And that has happened in many countries after COVID-19. So again, the point is the situation that this system of the people which are more vulnerable, the people that have less access to assets, less access to the financial system, those are the people that will be more vulnerable to this type of shocks.
Uh-huh.
And in the agri-food system, we have all these rural people that depend on the agriculture that they do, not only as producers but also as consumers of what they produce. So we need to help them by bringing this type of public goods so that they can make better decisions. Because if I tell you as a farmer, you could have a flood or you could have El Nino in the next 20 days, then he will make a decision if he takes this risk of investing
Mm-hmm.
or what varieties of seeds he needs to buy that will be more resistant to these extreme temperatures or to this excess of water. So that's the type of science that we can bring to them, the type of information that we bring to them, and what will start opening and bringing lights to the decisions they make because they don't have access to tools that medium or larger farms will have.
So you are trying to inform policy based on science and evidence, so that that addresses poverty and hunger.
Exactly. What we are trying to do is to bring global public goods that will allow poor people, people in hunger, and governments to be able to make better decisions, which will help to increase their resilience and to, of course, minimize the income effects that they will have
Mm-hmm.
because of the different shocks that we're facing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So all the work we try to do is to create information, public good information that will level these people which have less access to resources with people that have more access of resources, and therefore they can buy this information
Mm-hmm.
and they can get it from other sources.
Mm-hmm.
The best, I think, the best example is the following: if you are a large farmer in the US, for example, you will have a tractor. Your tractor will be connected to a satellite. You will be doing soil maps, so you know what is the perfect precision agriculture that you need to do to be able to optimize what you are producing or trying to plant. You will be able to know when is the best time to harvest,
Mm-hmm.
what the best variety you need to plant, how much fertilizers you need to use, and so on and so forth. Now we move to the Andes of Peru, for example, a small farmer, a potato farmer. He doesn't have that information. He's just using tradition and his own knowledge, and he's trying to optimize based on his own knowledge. But he doesn't know if there is going to be a lot of rain or not. He doesn't know how much fertilizer exactly he needs to put and what combination of NPK he needs to put. He doesn't have that
No,
information.
he
So
doesn't have a soil map.
exactly. So we can provide that as a public good. Of course, it won't be identical to the one of the big tractor, but it could help them a lot to make better decisions because we can do soil maps. We can tell them what is the blending that they need to put in place because we know what they are growing. So the difference of between what they grow and what the soil has is the blending that they need. We can provide an information forecast on climate, how when it will rain for how many days. So that will level them and will allow them to use the little resources in the best possible way. That's the aim.
Mm-hmm.
So that they lose less and they win more.
Mm-hmm. So people talk about food systems a lot these days. I think many of us understand what that is, and have an idea of what the problems might be, how they could be fixed. But here at FAO and in your work, we talk about agri-food systems. I wonder if you could give us a definition of what that is for you and for FAO, and maybe let us into more of your work in
No,
that
I think that's
sector.
a super important difference, and it's something that we are working intensively to make clear the difference. Okay, when you refer to a food system, you're referring just as food production. Okay, when we refer to agri-food systems, it's a broader definition. It's not a shorter definition. People get confused. They think by saying agri-food systems, we're shortening the definition. As that's not the case. Why? Because for FAO, agriculture is livestock, crops, fishery, aquaculture, forestry, agroforestry.
Mhm.
So all the sectors are covered in what we call agriculture. And when we refer to agri-food systems, we are referring to food systems, but also to production in agriculture, which is not related directly to food. For example, you are wearing a nice jacket that's based on cotton.
Mhm.
That's produced in the agricultural sector, and that's not food. No, it's biofuels.
Mhm.
It's also based on grains, and it's not for food. It's for fuel of
Fuel.
cars. And why it's important? Because two reasons. One, that creates income to producers. And the definition of food security is not only access, it's also access. So it's availability, which is to have production, but it's also access. Access means money, income. So if I generate income, people can buy more food. So that improves food security. Okay? Now, the other element is the systems part. The systems is super important because it creates interlinkages. We not only know that agriculture is linked to health, okay, there is no health without food,
That's correct.
NCDs, non communicable diseases, but we also know that our soil, water, land, environment is affected. So the agri food system is affecting the environment through emissions, is affecting the water because they use water, is affecting our oceans, is affecting our soils. So all those interrelationships are part of the systems. And the system is not only affected for what I produce for food, but it's also affected for what I produce for biofuels, what I produce for the cotton. So that is why the system approach is needed. And that's why we push for this definition of agri-food systems. Because if I have to create a transformation of the system, I can not only transform what is produced for food, because the soils are not only for food, the water is not only for food. So I have to look at the whole system. If I don't look at the whole agri-food system, I will never be looking at the system. I will be looking at a piece of the system.
Right.
That's why it's so important.
There's a lot of things going on in the world, climate change being one of them, terrorism, conflict. Why should our listeners or your people who are not working in this field, why should they care about hunger or poverty? Why is it important to them?
Because this is a world that is completely interconnected, not only in the space between countries, but it's a world which is completely interconnected between people. And why? Because if a country is suffering too much, there will be migration. We have seen what is happening in the world. Where there is a war, people migrate. Where there is hunger, people will migrate. So if we are able to reduce inequalities and to reduce hunger and poverty, we will always win. All of us will win. We cannot assume that the world is not interconnected. We cannot assume that migration won't happen. Building up big walls to avoid migration won't resolve the problem. They will find a way to go through that wall. We need to find a solution so that people stay where they are, because people don't want to move by definition. They want to stay where they are, where their families are, but they will move because they have a problem and they have to run away from that problem. So I think we need to change the way we think. We need to understand that the more equal this world is, the less hunger there is, the less poverty, the better we will all be. And therefore, that implies that we need to invest on this. We need to work on this to try to minimize those differences. No?
Perhaps this is a good segue into some of the things that you have talked about. That food security is a requirement for national security. That it's investing in agri-food systems is a very cost-effective way to promote peace. You have said in the past, and it's because conflict is one of the root causes of hunger. And as hunger grows, it can really fuel conflict. So they reinforce each other. If you could tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah, no, I think what you said of this reinforcement, because yes, it could be conflict could generate, or wars could generate food insecurity, but vice versa. No? If you are in hunger, you will create. And we saw what happened in 2011, no? And 2007. We saw what happened in the Arab Spring, and how the lack of food and the high food prices created a significant problem in terms of political insecurity. So it's really important to try to minimize hunger in the world in that sense. For example, if we look at what we are facing today, one of the major problems today is food inflation. And food inflation has several elements that we need to look at. First, it creates uncertainties, it creates risks, it will create political instability. And we have seen that elections are won because of a president in complying in reducing food inflation. Also, it will create macroeconomic instability, because there is a significant share in the inflation, in the overall inflation index of food. So if your inflation at the country level increases, that will create instability macroeconomically. It will also affect your exchange rate. And finally, and most importantly, when there is food inflation, it will affect the most vulnerable people. Why? Because they are the ones which spend the most of their budget in food. So if prices go up, the real budget shrinks. They can buy less food. If before they were buying 2x, now they have to buy one. And that will affect
Right.
their own health.
Yeah.
Now, if you have an empty stomach, you change your behavior. You behave differently and you try to get that food. You will try to move. You will try to migrate. You will try to do things that normally you will have not done. If you see your kids in your house that don't have food at night and they only have one meal or less than a meal a day, your behavior will change. It makes all the sense of the world. So we need to work on that, because it's the best way to prevent those changes in behavior to happen. It's the best way to prevent that migration to happen. It's the best way to prevent that this ends in a conflict and an internal conflict. And today, given the frequency and intensity of climate shocks, given what we are observing in terms of macroeconomic policies and lack of resources, the environment is the less appropriate to reduce hunger. And that's why we need to intensify more our work to minimize that risk.
Could you talk a bit about how countries can maybe strategically invest in agri-food systems to achieve that? And are you perhaps implying that maybe some of the resources that goes to defense budget should be moved to agri-food systems
Look,
investment?
we need to understand, and we have been in discussions with NATO through the Munich Security Conference. NATO today is looking into these topics, and they have always been looking into it. They understand the links, but also we need to understand the politics that are happening. No?
Mhm.
The world right now is very complicated in terms of security, and the level of expenditures in weapons will increase and is increasing rapidly. And of course, you have a fixed budget. If the share of expenditures in weapons increase, the share for everything else
It goes
shrinks.
down.
And that's what we are observing in terms of ODA. There is no donor we talk that they will say we have less resources today.
Mhm.
So that is the reality. And we cannot hide that reality. Yes, it will be ideal that a 0.0001% of the expenditures in weapons goes to improve food security and to do a transformation of the agri-food systems. And we are working on trying to create that link, but we are far from it. It won't happen tomorrow. So we need to keep working. We need to keep bringing evidence of these interlinkages so that they can see that there is really an economic return to the world and to the objective function of institutions like NATO to invest in this. Because at the end of the line, it will reduce the needs that they have to expend in weapons because there will be less conflicts.
Exactly.
So we need to work on that. We need to bring factual evidence so that they understand and they use this evidence to change the way they think in terms of these
Mhm.
expenditures. But again, assume that will take 2 years, will take 5 years. I don't know. Let's hope it will take less. And the best way to think about this is how we can increase efficiencies.
Mhm.
And there are several ways in which we can increase efficiencies. One is increase efficiencies in the money that governments are using. And that's what we call the agenda of repurposing agricultural support. Why? Because we want governments to use the little money they have for the agricultural system, many times less than 10% or 5% of their budget, in a more effective way. Not use it for subsidies that will distort, but use it to support, for example, shifts towards high value commodities to increase and reduce the cost of an access of a healthy diet.
But it's difficult to change subsidies, especially.
It's difficult, but can be done. It has been done already in Cairo, for example, regarding the subsidies to wheat for bread.
Mhm.
It has been done in many countries, but needs evidence. And that's our job, to bring and to show what will be the difference if you use that dollar and allocate it to something else that we know will have a better payout.
Mhm. Mhm.
Okay, so it's important to collect all this evidence.
Mhm.
It's important to understand and make governments understand that money well allocated and properly used will give better returns. And given that the budget constraint is shrinking, they need to be more efficient. So efficiency in the public expenditures is central. The second component is there is money in the international financial organizations. There is money in the MDBs, the multilateral development banks. Now, the problem is that there is a lot of duplication. The problem is that they are investing in things that don't necessarily is what the country needs. So we need to find ways to fix that. And one way to do that is to create convergence. So countries need to have investment plans already designed so that when a bank comes to offer resources, which will be a debt, very rarely will be a concessional loan or a grant, but at least they have the investment plans that they need to be able to do that and to spend their money on that. That's, for example, the beauty of the CARAP framework. No, the post-Malabo plans the new CARAP framework, which for Africa they have agreed on what is what they need,
Uh-huh.
but we need to operationalize that into investment plans, and that's where a country will be helped in what they really need. That convergence is important. The Alliance Against Hunger and Poverty, the global alliance that was launched in the Brazil G20, is exactly trying to do that. What it has is 3 pillars. The first pillar is the policy basket, which the policy basket is trying to bring the best practices to resolve social protection, to resolve agricultural investments that will reduce hunger and poverty in the most effective way. The third pillar is about finance. How I can create convergence of financing so that the financing of the banks goes to these best practices and not to other things, because we know these best practices in the policy basket already work. And the middle pillar is action at the country level. So the Global Alliance, I think, is a very good way in which we can create this convergence in the financing. But also it's important to put political pressure here. It's important that the boards of the bank make the banks to coordinate between themselves so that the convergence happens. We already know where to invest, how to invest. We need banks to complement each other and to invest in those investment plans. And the third bucket is how we can attract and increase financing from other sources. So we know ODA is going to shrink. We know the agri-food system is a sector that is the one that brings food to people, the right to food. But at the same time, it brings some externalities: emissions, use of water, deterioration of soil. So it's a sector that is creating a bigger impact in climate. But we know at the same time that it's a sector that can improve a lot. There is a space of improvement. So climate financing needs to come to this sector. Today, climate financing is only 4 or less percent, and to smallholders, less than 1%. Climate financing, when this is the sector that will really make a difference, because the energy sector, which is the other sector that contributes to emissions, is already fixed by the private sector. But the agricultural sector is the one that can shrink the 30% of emissions. Is the one that requires more investment, but they provide the right to food. So we need to find ways to increase investment from climate finance. But we also need to attract the private sector. So the private sector needs to play a bigger role. We cannot run from the private sector. And the only way the private sector will come is through bankable investment plans at the country level, through de-risking, trying to assure the first loss. But for me, de-risking is also information. It's de-risking because they have better information on where to invest. This is very well done investment plans, and also financial de-risking. So those are the 4 buckets which I think could help us to do this transformation.
Okay. The war in Ukraine has created blockage, to say the least, because Ukraine and Russia are both agriculture giants. And I know that you have played a very important role as part of the UN Global Crisis Response Group at the request of the Secretary General. Could you tell us more about what happened when the war began and your role in
No, thank you for the question. We need to first put things in context. No? When the war in Ukraine started, food prices were already going up, commodity prices, because of the recovery of the COVID-19. Expansionary fiscal policies by high-income countries has increased the demand, and that increased prices. Then comes the war in Ukraine. And why is so important? Ukraine was a key exporter of cereals, especially wheat, but also sunflower. Was one of the top exporters in the world. Russian Federation was a key exporter also of wheat, maize, soybeans, but also of gas, natural gas, which was central for the production of nitrogen in Europe.
for fertilizers?
For fertilizers. Nitrogen is one of the components of NPK, of fertilizers. So when the war started, everything stopped. The flow of grains from Ukraine stopped. The flow of gas from Russia stopped. The flow of cereals from Russia stopped. So what that means that you have less supply in the world, and then prices exacerbated. Now, it's important also to understand that at the beginning of the war, a big share of what Ukraine produced was already exported. The problem was the new harvests and how those harvests will go out. That's why the first focus that we had was to increase the storage capacities, because there was a lot of grain that were going to be harvested that couldn't move out because the Black Sea was blocked. It's where the vessels will move with the grain out. And that's why FAO invested a lot to build storage capacity so that we can store until the Black Sea was reopened. Then the other problem was that when the gas of natural gas was shut down by Russia Federation, then there was no gas to produce nitrogen, one element of the fertilizer mix. And then the price of fertilizer started to increase substantially. And that's a key input of production in the world. Even it went up to 4 times its original price. So when all this was happening, the Secretary General decided to create this task force. And the job of this task force, which was co-chaired by me, and by David Navarro, which sadly passed away a few months ago, was to try to find solutions to the problems. And we tackled two problems: the problem of the Black Sea and the prices of grains and the access, especially to Northern Africa for grains and for emergencies, and the prices of fertilizers. Regarding the Black Sea and the opening of the Black Sea, the creation of the Black Sea Initiative by the Secretary General was exactly a result of that. So we showed that it was essential for grains to move out because the other options that they were building through train were too costly and too slow, and the volumes were very small. So the Black Sea was central, and the Secretary General did a huge effort to create the deal of the Black Sea. But we also talk a lot about availability of food in the world and how we could increase resilience to these countries. Because at the end, what happened with the Northern African countries, which were the most affected, was that they only were buying from Ukraine.
Because they imported food,
They
right?
imported also
They rely on imported
their
food.
wheat from Ukraine. And they didn't have arrangements with other countries. Because although the price was going up, there was grain in the world. Because there were good harvests at that time. But they didn't have agreements, therefore they couldn't buy. It took them 6 months to set this up. And that had a significant impact over them. But then the other job of the task force was to avoid misleading information. Because people were saying, okay, but Africa will go into huge hunger because of this. That's not correct, because Eastern Africa consumes white maize. They don't consume yellow maize. So trying to bring more evidence through the agricultural market information system, that was the job of the task force. In the case of the fertilizers, what we did is we start working with all the companies that produce fertilizers in the world and trying to find solutions to what was happening and trying to find alternative ways for the fertilizer to move, trying to work with the sanctions teams of the different countries to try to find ways in which, without violating the sanctions, people could have, and countries, especially South America, which was a key producer in the world, will be able to get access to those fertilizers. So that was the job. And we were very successful in trying to move this forward. And David Navarro was amazing in trying to help this process and allow us to move forward. No? And I think the role and the political power of the Secretary General here was crucial. But I think it shows us how, with information, with coordination, we can minimize a huge problem that was happening in the world in that point in time. Now, today, grain keeps flowing. Fertilizer prices has gone down, not at the levels before, but they are completely lower now. And Ukraine is producing less. So the other countries start to respond and to produce more. Now, what is the major consequence for me, at least, is that our world has become again more concentrated in terms of less countries producing what we buy through the trade market. So the key exporting countries in the world is now at the levels of 211 because we reduce Ukraine as one of those big exporting countries in the world. And also in certain way, Russia.
And other countries are stepping in.
Other countries are stepping in, but countries that already were producing.
Okay.
So you have less countries exporting more.
Okay.
Why is riskier? Because if something happened to any of those few countries, you will have a problem, no? So what you want in a world where there is so many climate shocks, big countries around the world producing a lot and exporting. So if something happens to one, the other one will react.
Okay. So it's diversified
Exactly.
a bit.
The more diversified,
all right.
more
the safer you are.
resilient you are to risks.
Okay. Conflict is on the rise. We're seeing hunger increase in Gaza, the Sahel, Sudan, the DRC.
Yes, sadly, it's not only COVID-19, it's not only the war in Ukraine. What we are observing in the reports that we do, like the hotspots report or the food crisis report at FAO and with our partners, is that the number of countries that are in food crisis because of conflict has increased. And when we talk of food crisis, we're talking of acute food insecurity, the short-term food insecurity. What we saw in Gaza is something that is a result of a response to a bigger problem, a bigger conflict, but which has ended in a situation where all the production resources of Gaza has been destroyed, and also a population has been significantly affected because of the lack of food. At the beginning, the impacts were not so big because this was a well-nourished population. So when you are well-nourished, the impacts take some time to happen. But now this has gone for too long, and this has increased enormously the levels of acute food insecurity. And that's what we need to avoid. Most of the population in Gaza is in acute food insecurity, what we call IPC phase 4 or 5. So the peace now, apparently there is a peace deal going on. Let's hope that I will allow food to come in and to resolve that problem. But that's a problem that can be resolved with peace. In the case of Sudan and DRC and other countries in the Sahel, which are also in conflict, I think we need to work enormously to increase the capacity of production, to increase the income of these populations so that we can minimize in the future these type of conflicts accelerating acute food insecurity. But clearly, there is a need to deploy emergency. There is a need to increase availability of immediate food to these populations. And that's where ODA will go, and that's where we need to prioritize our resources. But these are issues that are not new. If you look at how many of these countries have been, with the exception of Gaza, of course, but in Africa especially, how many of these countries have fallen into this IPC 3 or above, what we call food crisis, it's not one time, it's more than one time. It's endemic, it's happening all the times. So that makes us think that we need to really change things to minimize these risks in the future.
Do you feel that you've covered well how countries should be investing in agri-food systems to promote peace and
I
national
think it's
security?
what the assumption here is that if we do proper investment in the transformation of the agri-food systems and we improve incomes of people and improve their livelihoods, it will allow to create a transformation and therefore minimize poverty and hunger, and that way by itself reduce the potential probability of risk of conflicts. Now, looking at the transformation of the agri-food system is not simple. In FAO, we have this framework of better production, better nutrition, better environment, and better life. So better production, what we are saying is we need to improve the efficiency in the way we produce. So produce more with less. So have seeds and varieties that use technology, innovation, so that we can provide to the governments and to farmers the best options. They will pick the option they want, but at least we provide them the best possible options on how to produce, have irrigation systems in place. Better nutrition means that we produce and provide them better quality of diets, because the problem is not only of undernutrition, it's also overnutrition. So it's undernutrition and overnutrition. So what we call overweight and obesity. We need to provide healthy diets. And that's what better nutrition tries to do. How we can reduce the cost of a healthy diet basket so that the 2.6 billion people that don't have access today could reduce. And that implies working also on production to diversify the supply of the world of fruits and vegetables, for example. And better environment for me is more the dimension of how we use our natural resources more efficiently and how we reduce the level of emissions in the world. And that requires thinking of the tomorrow. So whatever investment I do to improve productivity, to have better access to healthy diets, I have to think that I have to do it in a sustainable way so that I produce also more tomorrow, because I have good soils, I have more water, and I have less emissions. And finally, better life is the one that looks at the most vulnerable people. That's where social protection will play a role. We are looking at the tail of the distribution where the poorest are. We're looking at the school meal programs there. We're looking at the initiative that looks at the seeds, the most poorest LLDCs, to try to move them out of hunger and poverty. So I think those four pillars of the strategy of FAO tries to bring all these pieces that we need to do together. And also we have what we call accelerators, no? Innovation, science, data to open the lights so I can do better decisions that will help me to move forward, but also the institutionality, what we call the complements. So that is the way we are accelerating the transformation.
So we've been through COVID, we've been through major wars, and yet I feel like it's not an overstatement to say that our agri-food systems have remained resilient.
No, you're completely correct. Our farmers has shown that despite of all these shocks, we still have food. We still have access to food. We go to the stores and we have food. So I think the sector has shown that it's starting to prepare itself more and is more ready to the shocks. Even in our case, in the case of FAO, when we started COVID, we found that logistics were so central. We didn't have information on logistics. Today, we have state of the art information on logistics. I know exactly what will happen if I shut down the Red Sea, if I shut down the Panama Canal, or if something happens in the Black Sea. We have that information. We know how vessels are moving. We have also learned a lot about understanding the type of commodities in the world and where the stocks are that was in 2007 to 8 with the AMIS, the Agricultural Market Information System. So I think, yes, we are all improving our capacity of resilience, but the agri-food system has shown that our farmers are heroes at the end of the line. They find ways to be able to keep producing and keep supplying the food that we need. And also the agro industry, no? The agro industry, for example, in COVID-19, they immediately start to change the inputs they needed because they didn't have access to all the inputs they needed so that they could keep supplying the food. So again, good to know that, but that doesn't mean that we need to relax. On the contrary, it means that we need to keep increasing our resilience.
Right. In 2003, you wrote a seminal paper that studied the relationship between geography and welfare. And I see that finding of the paper reflected in your current work, like the Hand in Hand initiative that uses geospatial data to inform national planning. Could you talk to us about that, your experience?
So look, the paper of 2003, the first objective was to show that initial conditions matters. So where you are geographically located will matter how well you are. And what we found in the case of this paper, which was basically on Peru, is that if you live in a very adverse geographical area, of course, you will have less assets, less quality assets, more complexity to move your goods, and that will affect your hunger, your poverty, and put you in this poverty trap. So then the next step is, okay, what do we do? No, that means that we move all these people, we migrate all these people out of these highlands to the coast so that they are better off, and that's impossible, no? Of course, there are extremes. If you are in 5,000 meters over the sea level, yeah, you better focus on human capital so that these people have the capacity to migrate. But let's look at the continuum, no? And the idea was, okay, what can be done? The first thing that we try to look is at the infrastructure. So this paper was followed with a paper of infrastructure. And we try to look at how investment in roads, electricity, digital technologies, and water could help to move these people out of poverty within the geographical location they are. And we found that, yes, it could give returns. Infrastructure reduces inequalities, we know. Infrastructure gives you access to markets, we know. Infrastructure, especially electricity, opens your opportunities to other activities. It could be that because of the climate and because of the soils, you cannot do agriculture, but if you have electricity, you can do other things. And then the step was, okay, but it's just a road? Is just a road or electricity, or is the complementarities? So we start working in what we call the compacts, no? What happens if I only have a road? What happens if I have a road plus electricity? What happens if I have road plus electricity plus internet or digital technologies plus water? And we found that if we are good at making the complementarities appear, the returns are super higher. And that's what we start working on, this topic of investment in the space. Then I keep moving on my career and I start working also. Okay, now that I know that where the investments are and where I can identify investments that pay the highest return, I can use that to be able to prioritize investments in countries. So we develop a very nice typology for the case of Peru, where we identify areas that agriculture have potential, meaning that if I am in the frontier of production, I will be earning more than what I need to move out myself of poverty. And that's where the investment plans have to come. And then there are areas where agriculture won't resolve the problem. In the southern part of Peru, for example, no matter how efficient you are, your frontier is so low that in the short term, you won't be able to move out of poverty. So then I have two options: or do something else, or shift the frontier. Shifting the frontier, for example, is doing huge irrigation projects, like what happened in the coast of Peru, where we move a river to be able to irrigate it. But that takes years, 5, 7 years. If my priority is to move people out of poverty quickly, I have to do something else. That's non-agricultural activities. So we start to develop those investment plans, and we start building a database of those investment plans. And we reform the whole system of investments of Peru based on this. We look at the system of national investment plans in Peru, they call the SNIP, and we found that 70 to 80% of the projects were not optimizing the use of resources. PCs were not releasing the constraints and were not targeting areas of high potential. And that allowed us to start thinking bigger. And then I came to FAO. And the idea was, okay, with the Director General here in FAO, how we can build an initiative that will resolve and scale up this idea that we knew it will work. And that's how we started with the Hand in Hand initiative. So the Hand in Hand initiative tries to use the same concept, tries to use very sophisticated geospatial information that we have at FAO, where we can measure those typologies, identify those areas where there is agricultural potential. We call them the green areas. And we identify those areas where agriculture won't resolve the problem. In the case of FAO, because of our mandate, we focus on the green areas. And then we start working to find, okay, why we are not in that frontier. And those are the investment plans. So the Hand in Hand initiative started initially with the poorest countries. The countries have to request for it. They have to demand for it. Once they are a Hand in Hand country, immediately we deploy task teams to develop those investment plans. The typology first, then we work with the countries to identify which green areas they want to start. We deploy technical people in aquaculture, if it is fish, in crops, which if it is crops, in livestock or forestry or agroforestry. And we build investment plans which are specifically targeted to release those constraints. Which they aim that we know that if we release the constraints, they will be moving from $1.5 a day to $7 a day. So sustainably, we will be moving out of the country. So technically, FAO could do that. And we start doing it. Today, we are in 83 countries in the world. But the problem was, okay, we know what is the investment plan. We have an investment center that put the stamp of quality over the investment plan, which is a center that works with all the MDBs in the world. So any IFI will know that the plan is certified by the investment center. But we needed the money. We need to attract the money. So how we attract the money? And then we decided to develop the investment forum, which is part of our 3 forums in the World Food Forum. We have the Youth Forum, the Science and Innovation, and the Investment Forum. Why the Investment Forum? Because we thought initially we need to bring these ministers to present their investment plans to investors. And the investors were what? Traditional donors, ODA, IFIs, and private sector. So we started this 5 years ago. The first year, traditional donors and banks came. Private sector, very little. We decided, okay, let's work further with the private sector. In the second year, more private sector, 100 companies came, and the IFIs continue to come. But last year that we did the investment forum, we have 450 companies. We have all the IFIs. We have traditional donors. And we are trying to move forward with innovation in terms of investment. Why? Because we know how to handle ODA. We know how to handle banks. We didn't have too much knowledge on how to handle private sector. And what we have learned is that the private sector requires de-risking. De-risking is not only capital, it's not only money de-risking, it's also technical de-risking. So by having our investment plans done by the investment center, we are de-risking technically to the companies and giving them investment plans, prefactability plans that already are well measured, so they understand what could be their potential returns. But then we also bring the private sector arms of the banks, the IFC of the World Bank, the ADB Invest of the ADB, so they can financially de-risk. So we're starting making meetings with companies and banks so that they have the financial de-risking and showing our technical de-risking. And that is what is starting to attract more investment from the private sector. So today we have experiences, very beautiful experiences in the case of Dominican Republic. The first investment plan of Dominican Republic was to take advantage of a new resort that they are building in the border with Haiti. They have a lot of Haitians migrating to Dominican Republic. But now we are building production to supply the high-value commodities that those new resorts in an amazing beach in Dominican Republic need. And we are working with Haitian farmers that are migrating. So we're training them, we're building capacities. The government gives the piece of land to do this. Do we have the irrigation system that was developed by an investment of the World Bank? And that will create jobs to these people, to the migrants. They will stay close to their house, close to the border. It will give the supply that the demand from the hotels is huge, that normally they will have imported their food from other countries. And we resolve a problem of hunger and poverty. The other nice example, if you go to countries in Africa, for example, in Zambia, we're trying to work on scaling up production. In South Sudan, rice. We found that South Sudan has the perfect climate for rice. Of course, it's a very risky country because of conflict. But we found that we could bring varieties, technology, develop varieties that were resistant to extreme situations of weather. We tested in 1,000 hectares. Now we're moving up to 10,000 hectares. South Sudan, despite of all the risks, can produce a lot of the rice that is needed in Africa instead of importing the rice from other continents. In the case of Peru, every year Peru has the problem of potato supply. What I mean is that every year producers of native potatoes will harvest at the same time, and there will be a surplus of potatoes in the country, and the price will fall, and then the farmers don't know what to do. What we decided to do is saying, okay, let's add value. Ideally, we wanted to add value inside at 3,400 meters over the sea level. It was not possible, but we found a company that was willing to invest in producing Andean potato chips and then Andean potatoes French fries. So they did an investment, they scaled up the capacity, and we were connecting them to these native potato producers. They also did innovation because we found an innovative way to create the capacity to store the potatoes because the company needed the flow over the year. The harvest happened as a period of time. Now, if we have the freezing capacity and we know how to store the potatoes, we move that to 9 months to 12 months. So now we can store potatoes in the factory up to 12 months. That means that the company resolved the problem of continuity.
That's right.
And the farmer has a permanent demand. So these potatoes are now flowing to this company. They are producing amazing potato chips. They are producing amazing French fries of Andean potatoes. So the next phase for us is how we can invest with the private sector to also improve supply, reduce losses inside. We're using our app called the FLAP, Food Loss App, to try to reduce losses, measure where the losses are, and try because we knew that there was 30% of losses in the door of the factory. That means that the potato had problems that was coming to the factory. Now we can resolve that problem in the farm so that we can transport what is good and improve the quality of those potatoes, but also expand production. So that's the aim. No? And like that, we have projects in Asia, in seeds, we have Pacific Islands projects. So that's what the Hand in Hand is trying to do. So at the end of the line, what we're looking is technical information to better target interventions, develop investment plans for what is needed, and doing bankable investment plans that attract investment, not only from the traditional donors, but also from the private sector and the AFIs, so that countries can benefit from that. And that has empowered a lot the activities that we do in countries. And it's amazing to see how even presidents are talking about hand in hand and how we are creating now investment meetings at the regional level and at the country level. For example, in the case of Pakistan, the national investment meetings have been great. In Cambodia, significant investment from the private sector. They don't need to come to Rome anymore. They can handle there. In Latin America. So it's a movement which is growing, and we hope it will accelerate. Now we are also working with countries which are not so poor, like the case of Chile, the case of Mexico, where they are asking us to support them. We call them hand-in-hand approach because these are middle-income countries. But the same methodology, the same technology, which is helping us to reduce hunger in the world.
It's decades of your research and policy work really coming together, and you are able to do these things. Perhaps you want to share with us another success story that you're proud of.
I think I have been lucky in the way I have moved because I started as a researcher. Even my PhD dissertation is about IPOs,
Yes.
initial public offerings in semiconductors and biotechnology, which you will say what that has to do with agriculture and with poverty. For me, it's the same. It's basically figuring out what is succeeding, what is creating success. Now I am looking at how I can create success through information, geospatial information, through better targeting. And being able to spend a lot of my time in IFPRI, in research, in trying to test things, but then understanding that that was not enough because I was just testing. I was trying to influence policy, but I was not really doing things that could change life of people in the field. And then moving to the bank as an executive director in the bank and trying to understand the financing part and trying to understand especially the private sector. But then I decided, okay, but where I can go that can really have action at the country level, and that was FAO. And I was lucky that 7 years ago I came here and I was supported to empower those ideas. And that's how Hand in Hand came up. That's how we work on the new facility, the FSFC that we're working today. And what I am observing at FAO now is that the power that we have, not only in the Ministry of Agriculture, but in the country, because now we link with Ministry of Finance, with Ministry of Environment, is enormous. But we have to be careful, no? Because we're touching people. So if we are doing things which are not correct and we are not careful in what we do, we can damage. So we need to be very careful that our work is as solid as possible. People always say, why you publish, why you try to keep publishing? Because that's the peer review to what we are doing. So not necessarily the farmer needs to understand my paper, but I need to be as sure as I can that what I am trying to give to him is the best way to do it. No? So I think that linkage between serious work, serious research, and implementing things is something very nice that I was able to accomplish things. But one of the projects that really I liked when I was a younger researcher was Happy Faces. Happy Faces started me sitting in a hill in Honduras, and I saw how families were harvesting coffee, and their kids were migrating to be with their parents, meaning that the kids didn't have any capacity to go to school or to go to the health services because they have to temporarily migrate to the hillside to harvest coffee. They don't have access to school, they don't have access to the vaccination. And then I went to my home country in Cajamarca, in Yacanora, and I saw kids walking 3.5 hours to go to school every morning, one way, and coming back 3.5 hours more. So 7 hours a day walking. Kids that only have one meal a day. So you go to the schools and you see these kids that were falling asleep. These are secondary school kids.
They're tired.
They were tired because they didn't have food. And so I said, okay, we have to change this. No, we have to find a way to change this. And how we can change it. No, so that's where the idea came up with saying, okay, let's give them more information so they can make some choices. So it was very nice because we decided to start with a very simple thing, anemia, because these kids were anemic. So we went with a doctor that passed away now because of COVID-19, and we start testing them, and most of them were anemic. So we decided, okay, so let's do something very simple, which was chocolate pills to reduce anemia, iron, no? Chocolate pills of iron. So we said, okay, how we do it, no? How we test that this works. So we decided to provide a lap of internet to these kids. And how we get the internet, this was in the hills at 3,000 meters over sea level. We brought antennas, we connected, and then we built a lab in the school, a computer lab. These kids have never used computers in their life, okay? And we built a very nice lab for them. The whole thing cost $15,000. Everything, the internet connection, the laptops, the computers. Okay, now we have the computers, we have the internet. Now we need the message. And the message were videos. We will provide them with a video saying, if you take this pill every day, your health will improve, and so on and so forth. And then the question was, okay, how we provide this information? So we tested three ways. One was the school teacher, of course. The second one was the medical center. And the third one was the soccer player. We figured out that the kids love soccer. So we found a soccer player, Solano, which was a great soccer player in those times in Peru. And we developed 4 videos. One that was brush your teeth. And the other 3 videos have exactly the same content about this pill, but with different messenger, no? The health center, the professor, and the soccer player. And then we randomize to the kids the messages. So every morning the kids will go, pop up, the video will pop up, whatever video correspond to them. And then we put the health in the health center in a very hidden door that the video will say where, and nurse with a registry with the authorization of the parents that will distribute the pill every day to the kids. If the kids drink pills for 60 days, they will be with no anemia. And then we did a baseline of their cognitive ability. And I say, okay, I want the kids to have fun. No, I don't want to make things too complicated with them with written tests and so on. So we figured out that there was a game that was very good, that the kids could play in their computers, and it will give me mathematical ability, capabilities, and so on and so forth. So we have the baseline. We know where they were, and wanted to see if they improve their anemia, they will be better, and which was the best message. The conclusion, to keep it short, was soccer player was the one that really transferred the message. The kids were making lines in the health center
To get the
because
pill.
of the message to get the pill. Not only that, they started bringing the brothers, which was a problem because we didn't have authorization. So we couldn't give the pills to the brothers. But we religiously give the pill to the kids for the 60 days. And then the assumption was, okay, now the kids are less anemic. Let's test them again. We test them again, and the cognitive ability improves substantially. So The result of that was more healthy kids and kids that were more with better cognitive ability by their own decisions of going to drink that pill, and their grades start to improve. So then I say, okay, now I know my messages work. So we replicate that in a couple of other countries, and now here in FAO we are doing it in an emergency zone in Uganda, and we had similar results. So again, I hope this at some point scales up. And I thought that was for me a beautiful project, because if the project was not successful, at least the kids got the computers and they got connection to internet. So that's one of the nicest experiences I had.
How has coming from Peru shaped your worldview and influenced your work?
I think more than coming from Peru is being Peruvian, and I will explain why. When I finished my PhD, I knew I had to come back to Peru because I was a Fulbrighter. So I need to comply for at least 4 years in Peru after my PhD. And although my PhD, as I said before, was on high-tech technologies and IPOs, initial public offerings, I trained myself in all the different areas because I knew that in Peru I couldn't do that. So I need to be prepared to work in areas related to social issues, development issues. So I did all the sequence of econometrics, I did all the sequence of public policy, all the sequence of macroeconomics and microeconomics. And that, I think, helped me a lot to have a set of instruments that helped me to cope with. So I was resilient to the location I was going to work. And then I come to Peru, and it was true. I did things from telecommunications, high technology, to things that were related to hunger and poverty, like the work in geography and poverty, and the work on infrastructure. And that gave me a lot of tools and analysis that then allowed me to move out. I decided to move out of Peru because still I wanted to pursue my research career. And in that point in time, Peru didn't have the critical mass of scientific research that I needed to be able to continue publishing and increasing my human capital, because if I wanted to implement things in real life, I needed to have a scientific background and scientific human capital. So I moved to a research center, which was the International Food Policy Research Center. And there I stayed there for 15 years. And then I moved to the World Bank and then come back to FAO. So I think that capacity and that resilience helped me a lot. I also was very lucky because even when I was in undergrad in Peru, I was in a time of hyperinflation. So can you imagine being a young kid studying the book of what is happening in your country? In that time it was called Bacha. The president was Garcia. He was implementing the first part of Bacha, which was expansionary policies. He didn't implement the second part, which was the one that will allow prices not to go up. So hyperinflation skyrocketed, and then I learned what that meant. So it gave me a significant capacity to do that. And then I moved to the US, and we had the food crisis in 2007, 2008, 2011. And then we have the conflicts, and then we have the war in Ukraine. Then we have COVID-19. So I think, although these are bad shocks to society and affect the world, I think has helped me a lot to learn from those shocks and to keep building my technical resilience and trying to increase the level of instruments we have. I will never imagine we could have something like what we have here in the situation room. It's a dream that I thought of this 3 years ago, and now you can see it. It's real. It's working. No, so hand in hand, I never expected what I did in Peru will skyrocket to 83 countries in the world. So I think it has been super useful to have all this diversity of learning, and now I am so lucky that I know so many countries in the world. When I was in IFPRI, I started working in Bangladesh, a country that was a dual economy because of floods. I was working then in India. I was working in subsidies in electricity in India. I was working in Ethiopia in the worst of their times. And now I work in all Africa, Asia, Latin America. So I think that variety of experiences and seeing how things work in different countries have taught me a lot to respect the reality of the country, not to assume that people are doing things wrong because they don't know. I think that's a big mistake. They always know. They have different restrictions, and trying to learn how we can help them to move forward. No, so let's hope that I can keep doing these things. But honestly, I have been a very lucky person.
Thank you, Maximo.
No, it has been great talking with you, and thank you so much for the opportunity.